I hate to blame everything and all my bad decisions on my mental illness, but usually some of the biggest ones, it was raging. So it's not an excuse, it's just the truth. Because where I sit right now and I look at some of the things that I've done and I don't know who that person is anymore.
Kim, tell my audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm 59 years old. I was originally diagnosed manic depressive when I was 13. Over the years, that's of course turned to be called type 1 bipolar. And then just within the last couple of years, they've re-diagnosed me with schizoaffective disorder. Basically, schizophrenia with a mood disorder like bipolar. And the mood part of it is more prevalent than schizophrenia.
Back Home Media.
If you or someone you know is experiencing a suicidal crisis or emotional distress, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. I
want to welcome everybody to another episode of Something's Wrong. We've been down a little bit. I started a new job and things have been hectic and something has been wrong since I started the new job. I'm trying my best to wrap my my bipolar disorder, my OCD around a new schedule. But tonight we're joined by Paige. Kim, you were kind of like the perfect interview because I didn't really have to ask you anything. You pretty much told like a long story that was very interesting and compelling, and a lot of it has to do with how I see it as somebody who was kind of put through the ringer as far as like when you were a young kid, they were like, oh, this person's mentally ill. So that just lumped you into a group where they put you somewhere and just started basically pumping chemicals into you to now where you are who you are now. And you don't know what symptoms you're having because of mental illness or because of reactions to chemicals you have. What is the synopsis of what you're trying to say? What is your message to people out there when it comes to mental illness and people that know that there's something wrong?
Well, there's two things. I think like 2 years ago, bipolar became like the new black. Everybody said they were bipolar. And now the new black is PTSD. I'm really against people self-diagnosing themselves without going for appropriate evaluations. And I'm also against them getting the prescriptions from their family doctors because they don't get the follow-up that they need to have. I know that you have to be your own advocate or have somebody be an advocate for you to help navigate through the system. Somebody that's watching your back and somebody that's aware of what's going on. Because, like, I would like to say, like, in this book that I was writing, and I didn't know where to end the book because nothing really changed, right? Like, it's 45 years later, and they're still trying to work on medication for me. I don't like that message. I don't want that for my grandson. You know, that's my worst nightmare is that they're not going to be able to treat him properly because so far he hasn't responded to any of the treatment. One thing I would always suggest is always take your medication no matter how much you hate it. You know, if you're having bad side effects and things like that, don't just suddenly stop taking them. See your doctor. And it's just trying to survive. And there are a lot of people that have successful ECT, so I'd like to mention that too, that go and have that, and it helps their depression, and they're able to work and whatever. Sometimes they go before work and have a session done. I know they haven't brought that back up to me because they know that would be a hard no for me to have it done, but they've really run out of options. My biggest message to people is to watch for signs. You know, there's a big difference. Like, he doesn't treat me for, like, when Sheila died, he didn't increase my medication. He talked me through it, right? But he doesn't treat me for, like, where you're still supposed to have a normal range of emotions, which would be, you know, remorse or guilt or sad or whatever. They're not trying to numb you from those sort of feelings. And I think people think that that's, you know, with antidepressants and stuff does, but look for symptoms in your loved ones. And like for mania, it's pretty easy to sort of read because, you know, you have accelerated speech, You're not thinking rationally. You have visions of grandeur. You can make huge decisions on a split second that don't make sense. If I just tell you this story, I'll just tell you really quickly. It was something that my psychiatrist had told me. He's from Russia. And when he was a resident in Russia, there was an adolescent, and I think he was like 17 or 18 years old, that suffered terribly with schizophrenia. His parents and stuff had wanted him to get help, and he didn't want help. And some of his family disowned him because they just assumed he was crazy. So they finally had him committed, his family, and they put him on enough medication that the voices stopped. And then he became extremely suicidal. And he's suicidal because he suffered from a severe anxiety disorder, and the voices were his friends. And he was devastated that he'd lost that relationship with these voices that he had, because normally they don't want you to have voices because they can tell you to do bad things, right? Otherwise you're not hurting anybody, but the voices can tell you to do bad things to yourself or to other people, so that's why they get so concerned about it. But I don't know if Russia is more progressive or takes more chances, but they decided to take him off the medication and let the voices return because he wanted them so badly. So that's what they had done for him. And I know there's a backlog trying to get in to see psychiatrists. A lot of people think that they can't see a therapist because it costs thousands of dollars. But with the exception of when I was 9, when my parents took me to the psychiatrist, I've never paid a dime for any of my treatment, not for my psychologist, my psychiatrist, anything. It's all available, and it's free through Alberta Healthcare, which is fantastic, So just for people that need the help, there's places you can go to get it. Even places, I think, like the Ukrainian Center has family counseling and has different counseling, and it's just based on, you just pay whatever you can afford to pay. So if you can only afford to pay $5 for the sessions, you pay $5 for the sessions. But it's to be professionally diagnosed. If you see somebody with getting symptoms or them acting irrationally or whatever else, and get them evaluated, because, early intervention and stuff like that should be able to help people, at least if they can get on the right drugs now. I spent most of my life unmedicated, like my adult life, except for like the last 20 years. I don't know what else to say, Derek. I hate the system. It's all I have. I'm fortunate that I can reach my psychiatrist via email as well. I can email him in the middle of the night. I can email him whenever, and I know as soon as he gets to the office, he'll respond to that email for me, and he's always willing to talk to me. So I'm very fortunate that way. But, in writing the book, it's not like now she lives happily with her husband and her 2 golden retrievers in Connecticut and talks about the exploitation of women or anything like that. I'll never be well. I would like to feel better than I feel. But like I said, I don't know. They don't know where to go from here. So I'm not sure how the story's going to end.
Well, I appreciate you telling your story, and I appreciate you trying to leave behind data. I often think about, I'm 38. I've had bipolar disorder, and I've had OCD, and bipolar my whole life. To me, the bipolar, it took me forever to realize I had it because I just thought I was like killing it. I thought everything was going great. I was going to be big and famous, so yeah. I think I was a lot like you in the sense that my mania would last a very long time. And when I would get down, that never lasted long. I rarely had like any kind of, what somebody who didn't know what they were seeing would call like a pity party, like I rarely got down. But I enjoy that. And it's kind of the reason I do this show. I enjoy that you have been collecting data, not only on the treatments, not only on the symptoms, but also on the shortcomings of the establishment that is. And, at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I appreciate that there are people that are willing to go to work every day to help people with mental illness. But then at the same time, you run into another issue where, like, You don't know if you're getting proper care, if you're being abused. You know, we're talking molestation, all this kind of stuff. Basically, any kind of group of people is going to have some bad eggs in it. And I think that from what you're speaking of, I hope it's not like that in modern day. And I'm sure it is in some places in this world. But I hope that, you know, because people like you tell your story and because people like you share their data, I hope that we can learn from our past, never do to anybody else what they did to you.
Stuff is still going on. And, you know, that's what I mean. That's why people need to become their own advocates. And that doesn't mean like just sort of research your illness, because there's so many different misleading information. But it's really to be evaluated, to go and get a 3-hour assessment or whatever from a good doctor and see what they've got to say, if there's something going on, and if they think they can help you, and get the help that's out there, because it's there. It's just not perfect yet, that's for sure.
Right. This is something that really, and I hate to use the word annoy, but it annoys the shit out of me. Friends of mine that are obviously having issues, like whether it be bouts of depression, bouts of being suicidal, bouts of massive anger, they'll come to me because I am open about my mental illness on social media. So they'll come to me, and the first few times it happened, I thought I was like doing something good. They're like, I have these feelings, I have these symptoms, what should I do? And I'm always like, go to the doctor. And they're like, well, you know, I don't think I need to do that. And I'm like, okay. And then like a year later, they come to me, hey, I'm having these feelings. And I say, go to the doctor. And it's a vicious cycle of this. So it gets to the point where now I'm kind of like annoyed. I guess, what do you say to those people out there that, you know, because everybody, like you said, it's a popular thing to say you have mental illness, but I'm talking about people that aren't, they're so like, they're saying they're not mentally ill, but the only reason they're worried about it is because there's obviously some massive issues going on psychologically in their lives. What do you say to those people that feel like, you know, they only want to get help whenever it gets the darkest, but other than that, they're like in denial that there's anything wrong, aside from the massive amount of symptoms that they're showing?
Well, a couple of the little girls I helped raise with one of my boyfriends suffers from quite a few disorders. And, you know, her social anxiety is bad enough that she can't, and she's 21 now, and she can't go up to the clerk in 7-Eleven and buy her own things. She has to give them to somebody else because she doesn't want to deal with them. And her little proclaimer on her Instagram account is, under her bio, is that she keeps a loaded revolver beside her bed, so if an intruder came in, she could kill herself so she wouldn't have to meet anybody new.
Jeez.
And, you know, funny, not funny, right? So I finally said to her, because I tried as much as I could to get her help, but she's an adult now, and so I can't do the interview calls for her or the intake calls or whatever else. I can just, you know, did as much research for information for her as I could, and she just wasn't doing it, right? I don't think she thought that she was sick enough to do it. And I finally just said to her, I said, then I don't want to hear about it. You know, when you're serious about getting some help, let me know, and I'll be your advocate 100% of the way. I told her I'd go to appointments with her. I would, whatever I could do to support her, but she's still fighting it. Yeah, people with real mental illness usually tend to think that they don't have it. I don't have a solution for what to tell people to do, apart from I do the same thing. I tell them to go to the doctor. And then I've gone through the gambit of friends that are just like the armchair psychiatrists that say I'm over medicated, or I'm not really sick, or I'm probably sick because of the medication, or so I've got that whole group of people too that are, you know, think I'm not well because of the system. I don't know if there's any way that if you can record them when they're like that so they can hear themselves, like even, you know, some innocent sort of video clips of when they're or at their worst or when they're at their lowest point, and showing it to them when they are more stable.
It's upsetting because people don't listen. There's a comedian that was pretty popular here in Phoenix named Courtney Wallstrom, and she did my show a few times, and on both occasions she made several jokes about suicide, but they were, like you kind of said earlier, they were funny because she's a comedian. They were funny, but at the same time it made everybody in the room uncomfortable. and she totally committed suicide. I mean, like, there was often on Facebook, she would talk about, she would joke about that and stuff. So, and what's crazy is after she was gone, everybody was just like, I can't believe it. And I kind of got upset. I'm like, what do you mean you can't believe it? She told us every day she was unhappy, but she did not. And she was going to a psychiatrist, and she was trying to work, but they weren't giving, they were telling her she didn't need medication. But I mean, at the end of the day, we all on Facebook that were her friend, and she was a popular comedian here, we all watched her basically say goodbye to us over a 2-year period, where she was just telling, and I mean, 2 days before she did it, she wrote a post saying like how she didn't like when people decided to do that, how they caught any kind of flack, like people being like, well, how could they do that to their loved ones and stuff?
Oh, I have, yeah, and that's a huge opinion for me because, when I've said that, I just don't want to be here anymore, right? There's not a lot of options, right? It's not because I necessarily want to kill myself, but there's here or there's not here. People saying to me, that's so selfish, whatever else. I said, no, what's selfish is watching me go through this my whole life and not wanting me to feel better. I said, that's just selfish. You want me to stay well for you because it makes it easier for you when I'm well. I said, but I'm the one that's suffering. So if it was a child with cancer and the cancer was painful for the child, would you not prefer that the child pass away peacefully in their sleep and be out of their pain? Or do you want the child to stay alive and be sick and be in pain because it's easier for you? Because I thought Sheila was brave by taking her life, and I know people are going to react to that, but I was like, sister, she fought hard.
I think that there's a big misconception because most people who aren't close, even people that are close to it, there's people that have had like siblings commit suicide. I never understood it myself. I have an older brother that's attempted several times. Most of those times were when he was medicated. I think my brother's bipolar. He doesn't, but he doesn't take any kind of medication. And I guess for the most part, like he's pretty okay. Like he gets some mania a little bit. Like he thinks we're going to, we write songs together, and sometimes he thinks we're going to be famous and stuff. But I mean, he's not doing anything like real destructive, but when he was younger, they would just throw him on antidepressants without, when he was bipolar, and he tried to end his life twice. And so even me, who had a brother who tried it twice, I never understood it. I always just associated people that ended their lives as like, man, how it's kind of pathetic. Like you just got so sad that you just like, oh, there's nothing here. But then whenever I went through with OCD, I went through like a brutal 2-year period where I had just had 2 kids, and I just felt like fate was coming to get me. I just had this feeling like my number was up and I had, weeks to live. So it was like a very dark, and it got to the point where I would never, well, I can say never, but I would never at this point in my life end my life because I have 2 kids and I just don't want to do that to them. But if they weren't around at that point, like I understood how somebody could do that. I was like, I would, obviously I'm not going to do it. I was like, but if I were just to do like, one thing, and I can put a stop to this torture, this stop to this of just constant voice, constant inner monologue of like, this is going to kill you. This is going to kill you. This is going to, I got exhausted. I didn't, my guard that was up, like he was gone. Everybody quit the plan upstairs, and it was just me. And I totally finally understood how somebody could do that. And just like you, like when I see somebody do that, and I know that this is dark, and I know that people think it's dark, but I too look at them just like, you're a badass. Like you decided to say enough is enough, and see what happens on the other side. We don't know what's over there, but now you do. Now you know what's on the other side, and that's something I don't know. It's like I understood, and obviously as a person that knows people, you don't want anybody to end their life. But yeah, I don't really have anger at anybody that ends their life. And I know several people that end their lives, and a lot of times what I found out was they didn't even really mean to end their lives. They were thinking about it. They were in a dark place, but something happened and they ended up accidentally taking their lives. So I agree. I think that's how the world processes it. Like, well, that's so selfish. He has, he has kids, or she has kids, or their mom. But you're right. It's like, yeah, but you have no idea what it was like. You don't even know if you could make it 15 minutes in that body. You have no idea.
Yeah, and it's because it's just when I know now that like my dopamine center has been burnt out, because the first thing my doctor had even said to me, because I've still had cravings for cocaine for the last 10 years. They never went away, even though there's not really a physical addiction to like soft cocaine. It's more psychological because it does produce dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
That if I was to do some cocaine now, that it probably wouldn't affect me at all because of my dopamine not being processed. So even that was a shock, because that was sort of like an ace in my pocket for me. I've always thought that if I feel really bad at some point, I will order up a gram of cocaine and I will feel better and get through that moment. So I always sort of had that as an ace in my back pocket.
Right.
That I still, maybe cocaine would make me feel better. But knowing that my mania is not coming back, like ever, I don't know how to process that, because like I said, it was like my friend. I counted on it, No, and I feel sorry for you, Derek, with what you're going through, because I know some people that suffer from OCD and just how debilitating of a disease that is, and they hate it. They know what they're doing, but they can't stop it. It's like a runaway train, and I just don't have the answers for anybody. And I tried so hard with my grandson to get him help. My psychiatrist used to be a child psychiatrist and now deals with adults. So I asked him if he would see my grandson, because I thought if my grandson saw a bad psychiatrist, he would never see another one again. He'd refuse. And there's a lot of ones that don't have any bedside manners or aren't very nice, or, there's a lot of them that are very cold in that industry. I asked him if he could please see my grandson. And he said when he saw family members, it got a little messy. So I went back to him and said, you know what? I will give up seeing you if you will take him, because I'll keep looking until I find somebody good. Because I know that they're out there, but that's now where. So he finally agreed to take him on as well, so that we both see him. We're just not allowed to talk about
right
each other. But no, I don't know. When I think about suicide and stuff now, my mom had a fall last year. She was living in independent living, but she fell and split her head open, had a brain bleed, and now she can't really move from the neck down. So she's in long-term care, and her crying and begging us. Like she said, she cries every time she wakes up because she asks the Lord to take her in her sleep. So, and watching my mom be healthy, but not being able to move her body, and be in a long-term care facility, and with the lockdowns, she was in the Miz during the lockdowns, and she's been on lockdown like 4 or 5 times because of COVID. Right, we've had 2 end-of-life visitations with her where they thought she wasn't going to make it, and she pulled through. And it's one of those things. It's like, I love my mom, and I love that. I don't know what I'd do without her, but man, I don't wish this for her. Like if she could die quietly in her sleep of a heart attack, that would be such a blessing for her. I can't imagine living like that. And, we go visit her on the number of days they have allowed us to be there right now while they're reopening things up. And it's awful because she thinks we're there to pick her up and bring her home. She doesn't realize that she's never coming home. I look at that and it's the same sort of thing. I want her here for me because I still need to talk to her. But in all fairness to her, I wish that she would just quietly pass away in her sleep and not have to live like that. And I can't commit suicide because this is my reasoning anyways, is because I don't want my life insurance to be null and void. I can't leave my mom's responsibility of like going and seeing my mom and making sure she's okay and being taken care of and not abused and everything, because now anytime anybody's institutionalized, I'm worried they're abused. But she seems to be getting good help. But I couldn't leave her with my daughter as my daughter's responsibility, plus have it in the label of her mother committed suicide, even though, she's the one that drew the short straw, right? She was raised by me and watched me go through these range of emotions, and, and everybody says, we liked you better when you were manic. I certainly was a lot more fun when I was manic than I am now. But thanks for letting me talk, Derek. I don't know if I answered anybody's questions or if anybody, the one thing is that I have been off cocaine for 10 years now, so that is something. The demons don't come anymore, so I take that as a big victory, because I know he had even gotten to the point where he asked me if I was a religious person, my doctor, and that I should perhaps consult clergy on it, which really scared me, because I was thinking, now he's thinking these aren't hallucinations either, because they never felt like hallucinations to me. They felt real. I'm fortunate to have the family that I have that takes me in through all of these experiences. The reason that I go by a different name and things like that, my daughter, because she's been through enough. She's been through enough. She doesn't need more attraction or attention put on it. And the other thing I flare up about is if people tag me on mental health articles on Facebook and things about depression and about anxiety and I know these people, when I'm just going, I wouldn't dare put something on there. That would be the farthest thing from my mind, is for me to explain my mental disorder online or talk about being depressed or whatever else, because there has been always such a stigma attached to it for me, because I've had it for so long. There's your friends, like you say, the ones that don't believe they're ill, and then everybody else who just thinks mental illness, or doesn't know the illness, obviously, and they're so bipolar. And I'm like, what's so bipolar mean? Well, 1 minute they're happy, 1 minute they're sad, 1 minute, or they're mad, or remember, that's not what bipolar is. I don't know if how much responsibility people can take for each other. I mean, I think if they'll allow you to be an advocate because they're afraid to ask the tough questions, or they need somebody in there that can tell the doctor what they see, because most of the time the patients don't see it themselves. That's the only thing I can think of, but they have to be willing to go and get evaluated. And I don't know how to get somebody in to be evaluated that doesn't want to be.
Well, Kim, I do appreciate you coming by and telling us your story. Now, is any of your writing and stuff online yet, or are you still in the process of getting that all ready to release to the public?
It's still getting ready to be released. People are going to like it or not like it. The book's going to sell or it's not going to sell. I'm not ashamed of... That's not true. There's things that I regret doing that if I could do them over again, I would have done them differently. And I hate to blame everything and all my bad decisions on my mental illness, but usually some of the biggest ones, it was raging. So it's not an excuse, it's just the truth. Because where I sit right now and I look at some of the things that I've done, and I don't know who that person is anymore. I was originally diagnosed manic depressive when I was 13. Over the years, that's of course turned to be called type 1 bipolar. And then just within the last couple of years, they've re-diagnosed me with schizoaffective disorder.
Right. And I guess I want to go to the beginning, but is that something that you feel like you always suffered with, or you feel like that's something that came on, or you've always had it, you think?
I was a very unhappy child. I didn't understand why. And I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family that did everything for me. And I remember watching out the windows in the morning and the kids on their way to school and skipping and looking so happy and everything. And I couldn't understand what they were happy about. So when I think I was 9, when they took me to see a psychiatrist because they just didn't know what else to do with me anymore. And his evaluation was, or his diagnosis was, that I was a spoiled brat.
Wow.
I was born and raised in Toronto, and My dad was working up in Fort McMurray, working with Bechtel while they were building Syncrude, and he was flying back and forth. And I was a hard child to raise. I wasn't a very nice child and was getting into all sorts of trouble and was using drugs quite young. Very promiscuous behavior, just a lot of the symptoms now that I know that go along with, mental illness. And so when they said we were going out to see my dad, we were flying out to visit him. And then when we got there, they told me that we weren't coming back because they knew that I would never have left Toronto for Fort McMurray in the 70s because there was nothing there. So I, being manic, and must have been manic or just stupid, I forged some checks in my parents' name and hitchhiked from Fort McMurray to Toronto when I was 13. That was easier back then. It was, an acceptable sort of practice to hitchhike, and I just went with truckers back to Toronto. I hadn't really thought about what I'd do when I got there because I couldn't really live with any of my friends because they were all 13 and 14 too. So I just sort of couch surfed for a little while and then was found unconscious in one of the parks in Scarborough, Ontario, from an overdose of PCP. And so the police took me to the psych ward at the hospital in Scarborough there. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say about, is it okay if I use their names?
Yeah, for sure. You can say whatever you want.
Okay. So that was Centenary Hospital in Toronto, and they decided to put me on the adult ward. And normally if you're an adolescent or a child and you've got a psychiatric disorder, they put you on the pediatric floor for obvious reasons. And the doctors would just see you there, but they put me on the adult floor, and they said that they were going to teach me a lesson. I'm not sure what lesson, but I guess because I did come across with a lot of snotty attitude and stuff, that maybe that's why they thought I needed to be there. I was there for quite a while. They'd phoned my parents. I had finally given them my parents' phone number, and my dad told the police officer just to keep me. They didn't want me back. And back then there wasn't all the paperwork and stuff that goes involved with that you can't just say that. So anyways, they had to keep me in the hospital. I think I was there about 3 months before I was placed into Bethel Home for Girls. And it was for wayward girls, which would simply meant runaway, disruptive, pregnant, any turmoil that was going on with them. And so I was admitted into Bethel. I was scared in Bethel. When I first got there, there was 30 girls, but I tried to phone my parents to tell them that they put me in this awful place, assuming that they would want to get me out of there, and just because of some of the abuse that was going on in there. And but when I went to phone them, they'd changed their phone number, so I couldn't get a hold of them. Supposedly years later, my mom said that she'd been in touch with our head mistress there and keep in touch and see how I was doing that way. But they felt that it was best if I had no communication with my family at all. And Bethel is, there's a number of these homes that are run by, the one I was in was run by the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. But there was also ones that were run by the Catholic Church and the Salvation Army and, a number of religious organizations. And they've all been shut down for inhumane treatment. I would still go back every day to Centenary Hospital for the day program for the adults and join in the adult group therapy. But they were so heavily medicated. The medication back then was so strong. And so nothing much was accomplished that way. I had a really good psychologist. I didn't want to talk to him at first, but he eventually sort of won me over just from being so kind and gentle and caring and whatever. And I remember I asked him one day if, I don't think I'll name the doctor, but that just say Dr. B, I wondered if he had thought I was pregnant, and Ed, who was my psychologist, said, "No, why would I ask something like that?" And I said, "It's because he gives me an internal examination every time I see him." And so Ed just got up and walked away, and the next day I was assigned a new doctor. It didn't occur to me till years later that I'd been being molested. And, I think he was just removed from my care. I don't think anything ever happened of it. But when I was in Bethel, if they couldn't control me at all, or not even not control me, but if they felt that I was off, or I had attitude, or was misbehaving at all, they would send me back to the psychiatric ward. So I'd usually go there at least once a month for a week, and sometimes I'd stay for another 2 or 3 months. Some of the stuff that I experienced as far as abuse goes is that when I was out of control, they would use wet blankets and wrap them around me, and they were cold wet blankets, and then they'd restrain me to the bed, and they'd leave me like that for 4 or 5 hours. And it's called hydroshock therapy. It's a form of it. The other one they used to use is a tub, but they stopped that like years before that, just because of the amount of space that it used to take up. So they were doing hydroshock therapy on me, and that was supposed to be like, now they just give you needles, right? They can just give you a shot to calm you down. And when I was in there for longer periods of time, they used insulin shock therapy on me, which basically they give you large doses of insulin over a period of a number of weeks, and it eventually puts you into a coma for part of the day. So every day you would sort of be unconscious.
Yeah, I guess let's go back to the beginning. So you're a young age whenever they diagnose you with manic depressive. In your opinion, what symptoms were showing up that would merit you going to see a specialist? And 2, what feelings were you feeling? Do you feel like that's where you needed to go?
Well, I ended up there because that's where the police brought me after they'd picked me up from the hospital. I didn't pick me up from the park, and they automatically just put me on that floor. When I look back and just knowing my mental illness as well as I do now, all of those signs would have been me being manic, like just making the decision to hitchhike across Canada and, forge the government bonds and some checks and that sort of behavior. And I was either that way or I was very unhappy. I didn't think I needed to be there because I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I definitely didn't need to be on the adult ward, for sure. That just ended up becoming part of my lifestyle at a very young age. I was in Bethel from 13, and I was supposed to get out on my 18th birthday. And when they had the meeting about releasing me, they decided to wait another 3 months, that I wasn't quite ready. Unfortunately, during that period of time, and I know it sounds, because I was so young, it sounds like it doesn't matter much, but I'd been in a relationship with a boy before we moved to Fort McMurray. I'd been involved with him from 12 to 18. I had an incident in the hospital where I was doing better, like I was cooperating, and I wasn't throwing my food. I threw my food once, and like my oatmeal once when I was in there, because one of the orderlies, and they were just sort of like bouncers, they weren't clinical anything, they were just big guys, and walked behind me and just sort of slapped me upside of the head on his way by. So I threw my oatmeal, and they held me down and made me eat it off the floor. They also, the fondling and the molestation and being present in the room when I got dressed. I didn't know what my rights were. I didn't know, but nobody seemed to care that they were doing it. So I assumed that it was an acceptable practice. I didn't know that it wasn't. When I was in Bethel, once I got over being scared and realizing that the girls were just sort of being a little territorial, but sort of came around after a period of time. We had orderlies there as well. They were awful people. They weren't nice people at all. Like, they would make us get undressed make sure our door was left open, come into the showers when you're in the showers and see that they had to wash you down. So they would soap you up and wash you down. When you first got to Bethel, you didn't get any privileges for the first 3 months. And privileges were simply like maybe having 3 hours access outside of the girls' home. But because I didn't have any privileges, I didn't see that I should have to do the chores, because that would have been me being obstinate and probably manic at that point as well. My chore had been to clean the stairwells, the front and back stairwells, for the week, and I didn't do it. So one of the orderlies came with me and sort of dragged me down to where the stairs were, and there was 3 floors, so it's like 6 flights of stairs on both ends, and on the steps were these gray gridded mats that, like, so you don't slip on the stairs. And he gave me a tin pie plate and a toothpick to clean between the grates on these mats on these 6 floors, 6 sets of stairs. And then as I'm doing it, he would just walk in front of me with his dirty shoes and tell me to do it again. So I did it for about, I think it was 18 hours. I'd wet my pants because he wouldn't let me go to the washroom. My knees were bleeding because I'd been on the steps for so long. Then when I was done that, I did my chores after that. I mean, that was one thing that was accomplished by it, I guess, but they were pretty brutal in there too. I mean, they would control whether you ate or not, depending on your behavior. Cold showers, no showers, showers with assistance, so with the orderlies. And then we had, because it was run by the Pentecostals, we had a chapel right in the building, and we had Bible study 6 nights a week, and then we had chapel on Sunday. They thought I was doing better. I wasn't acting up at Bethel, and I was going and doing my groups during the day at Centenary Hospital, and they seemed to think I was doing better because they'd given me the medication to take back to the dispensary at Bethel, because all of my drugs had been dispensed by the nurse that was at Bethel. And so they thought I was doing well enough that I could carry the medication home with me after my adolescent group therapy, because I attended adolescent group therapy Thursday nights. So on that Thursday, I stayed after my day program because the night program started at 7. So I would just stay there until the adolescent group therapy started. And so for whatever reason, because I felt fine, I wasn't suicidal, I wasn't anything, but I went and took the whole bottle of pills at the water fountain. And I remember my psychologist, Ed, was walking up the hall and could obviously tell something was wrong with me. And the pills I took were really strong. I went into cardiac arrest 3 times and wouldn't have survived had I not taken them in the hospital. So I'm not really sure what that's about. It did prevent me from wanting to hurt myself. Again, I was too afraid that I would be a vegetable. I know that when I woke up and I had the heart monitors and stuff on me, and I went to speak to the nurse, and she just slapped me across the face and said that they had enough trouble for me for one night. So there's just a lot of abuse that just went with it, with the mental health. We really didn't have much of a voice and much choice on medications and group therapies. People were so drugged that not much was being accomplished there. Then Bethel was, I got along with the girls, and so that sort of felt a bit like a family to me. But after I'd taken all those pills anyways, I lost a lot of my cognitive abilities. Like, I couldn't tie my shoes and I couldn't button up my shirt and things like that. So my boyfriend would sing the ABCs for me and help me tie my shoes and helped reteach me how to do some of those simple things that had been lost because of the lack of oxygen. When I was to get out, Rick, who was my boyfriend for 6 years at that point, had gotten a job and an apartment, and I was going to get a job when I got out of Bethel. And unfortunately, 3 weeks before my release date, Rick was in a car accident and killed. I was allowed to go to the funeral as long as I had Pastor Paul with me and a social worker, but they wouldn't let me go to the reception or anything like that. But Bethel at that point decided that because, I took that extremely hard. I vowed when I kissed him in the casket that I would never kiss anybody else again, and I never have, not to this day. And my boyfriends they knew it was non-negotiable, and they just accepted it. So I went back to Fort McMurray. They sent me to my parents, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. And the first thing my dad said was he didn't want Rick's names mentioned in the house at all because he blamed Rick for all of my problems, when really Rick wasn't a source of the problem at all. It was me. I got pregnant when I was there, and was talking to Penny, who had been my roommate at Bethel, and she was out of Bethel and she was working and had an apartment, and she said I could come and live there. So I just couldn't stand being in Fort McMurray. So I went to Toronto again, and I think I was doing normally well. It's hard for me to tell because I never really had like a normal phase. I was either one or the other, or just coming down off of one phase, moving up into the other. So went back to Fort McMurray, got pregnant again, and I was partying. I was using a lot of cocaine during that period of time too. I started using cocaine at a very young age. So that was fueling, my behavior as well. And I got a job out at Suncor, and that's one of the oil plants out in Fort McMurray, reconciling employee expense accounts. And I would just go out every night, even though I had the 2 kids. It was just sort of a lifestyle in Fort McMurray when people lived and worked out in the camps, that they'd come in and they partied pretty hard in Fort McMurray back then. There was an awful lot of money floating around and a lot of drugs. I took my Canadian Securities course because I thought at the time I'd like to be a floor trader on the VSE, because I thought that my energy level was that. I thought it looked like a fabulous job. Like when I watched how crazy they looked, I felt that I could do that job. But I ended up working for a merchant bank and doing mergers, acquisitions, and takeovers and stuff. And they were moving from Fort McMurray to Calgary. So I was going with them. I left my son behind with his dad because I knew his dad would never allow him to go. And we'd get back to Fort McMurray like once a month to see him, and my daughter saw him more than that. I would send her on the bus. So I was in merchant banking, and like I said, I always felt sort of invincible. I could work really hard and long hours and function on very little sleep, and my manic phases lasted a long time. Manic phases usually only last sometimes 2-3 months, and mine would go on much longer than that. I wasn't on any medication. I swore when I left Bethel I would never be medicated again. I always thought I could do anything. I really felt invincible. So I was looking at executive rentals for apartments and came across a penthouse on the 37th floor downtown, and went to look at it and just told them I'd take it even though I really couldn't afford it. But I just assumed I'd just get another job on top of the job that I had, or I'd make it work out. And as it turns out, my best friend, she was dating somebody from, quite a notorious motorcycle club, and he was a distributor for Western Canada and wanted to use the penthouse as a place to keep his stash before it was cut up and distributed. And they would pay the rent on the penthouse and plus give me an ounce of uncut cocaine, which is extremely strong. It's as close as you're going to get to it being pure, because they step on it and then it gets stepped on so many times by every level of the organization and dealers and stuff. So I was doing that. And then when I was at work, and I was doing really well. There was a lot of money in that. You only had to do a couple of good, 2 or 3 good deals a year, and you were doing really well. I decided that there was more money in the sex industry than in finance. And that's street mania, because I didn't even know anybody that was in the sex industry at all. I didn't know any escorts or dancers or anything. So I knew I wanted to open my own agency, and that's the way I wanted to go. And so the only way that I would be able to get the information about how they operated or how they worked or anything about it at all, I didn't know what they charged, I didn't know what they did. So I became an escort myself. I saw an ad in the paper and they were looking for escorts, so I went and they hired me. And at that point, it was just still legal. It still is legal. You just had to be licensed to the city and couldn't have a criminal record or whatever. So I tried to figure it out. I remember my first call, and I remember being scared and nervous and not quite understanding how you're supposed to accomplish some of the things you're supposed to accomplish in the time frame that you're there, because most of the calls were a half hour to an hour, until you got into some of the better calls or calls with regulars that you have a history with that keep you longer than that. So it took me about a year of working for another agency while I was having 2 commercial days turned into office space for myself, because you basically keep 10 girls, 15 girls with you on site at all times, and they work shift work. And then I had the girls on call. So I know I was manic then. I was, we were opened at 7 a.m. and closed at 2:30 a.m. And that's when we could take our last call. So the girls wouldn't get to the calls until 3, and then they'd be there for an hour, and then they'd call in and say it'd be another hour. So a lot of times, they were just getting out of the calls when it was time for the agency to be opened again. So I wasn't sleeping much at all. So that was mania and cocaine. I know, when I see my psychiatrist now, he always says to me, do you have any thoughts of overthrowing the government or starting your own religion? And I know that's sort of a weird thing for him to say, but when I used to start to go manic, I would have a conversation with him about that, about where I thought it was flawed or whatever. So that's why he always asked me that. Things were going really well, and I was seeing really bad clients, which is also something I wouldn't have done, and seeing all the fetish people. I was seeing the 1% that nobody else would see. So I had a couple bad experiences, but overall it was just pure adrenaline keeping me going. And the thing with my bipolar is, it says once my mania is gone, I drop, and I drop fast, and that's when I crumble. Mania to me has always been my friend, even though they don't like you to be manic. They'd rather have you more on the depressive side, because you can do more damage when you're manic. People spend their life savings, they start gambling, they'll start drugs, they'll whatever, but they start, some really poor decision-making mechanisms are affected. So it turned out one day that I just knew that I was sliding into a depression, and I wouldn't be able to run the agency, that I wouldn't be able to do it. There'd be nothing in me, because I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. So I ended up shutting down the agency, and I walked away from Calgary, and everything I owned, all my belongings, all my clothes, everything, left with just the clothes that I had on. I even left my daughter there. And came to Edmonton to stay with some friends for a little while, and was starting to feel better again because I could always rebuild myself when I would go through these depressive states. The only thing that kept me sane at all was the fact I knew the mania would come back, and then I could rebuild my life because I could do anything when I was manic. So I got a job and really quickly accelerated up through the organization. I think within 6 months, I'd gone from assistant in the labor market department to the executive aide to the director of administrative services to the executive aide to the president. And it's the same thing. I was manic and I worked long, hard hours, and I could do it, and I just flourished in that environment. So I was doing fine until I wasn't again. And this time it was really low. That's when I was diagnosed with type 1 bipolar, was during this incident when I went on long-term disability from work. And that's what they classified it as, was type 1 bipolar. So I had the job. I worked really hard for a couple of years, was doing quite well, and then the depression hit again, and they were still trying to stabilize my medication because I was back on medication after I went on long-term disability, but they couldn't seem to find the right cocktail. I'm pretty medication resistant, so I take awfully high dosages of all the medications that I was on. And they decided that, to hospitalize me and to try to stabilize me in there. And that's when they decided that they do ECT. And that's, for most people, I think they know what it is. It's electroconvulsive therapy, which is also shock treatment. But it really aids in helping depression. And I never would have agreed to it. Wouldn't have been in the frame of mind to agree to it. And my dad had my personal directive, so they were supposed to contact my parents before they made any decisions like that. And they didn't, and they went ahead with the shock treatments. And for those of you not familiar with shock treatments, it's not like it was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest where you're violently thrashing around, because they give you such a strong muscle relaxant, which is sort of contradictory because they're trying to get you to have a seizure. But I guess they're just wanting your mind to have the seizure, not your body. And so people were getting cracked ribs and things like that. So it's usually anywhere from 5 to 12 sessions that they would give you at a time, and like over a period of a week or two. And they simply roll you in, tape your eyes shut, put a bite plate in, the anesthesiologist there, and they put you under, and they do either bilateral, which is both sides of your brain, or unilateral, which is on your less dominant lobe. And I was getting bilateral, so both sides, and they weren't getting satisfactory seizures. Like, I have copies of all of my hospital notes and things. You just had to pay for them to be photocopied. So I've got copies of everything. And they weren't getting satisfactory seizures. They weren't lasting long enough for them. So they like the seizure to last anywhere from like 20 seconds, but it can go up to about 3 minutes long at the very longest, because it's not recommended at that point. They're just trying to get 15 to 20 second seizures out of you. And I think they were getting 5-6 seconds out of mine. So I had been on some of the medication I was on is to help control seizures, because some of the medications can produce seizures. So they took me off that medication and then upped the electricity. I'm not sure what it's called, kilojoules, or I'm not sure what a kilojoule is, but they upped the amount of electricity they were running through me, and I overseized. So I seized for just under 6 minutes and had bit through the bite plate. The only thing that moves now is like an arm or a leg when you have it done. But because I seized so long, I had bitten through the bite plate, which was rare, and cracked my teeth. and ended up with retrograde amnesia, which is basically you forget things from before it happened. And for quite a period of time, like my daughter came up with my grandson. He was 2 at that point, and I didn't know she'd had a child. I have no recollection of that. That'll never come back. And then it's sort of retrograde amnesia is what Alzheimer's patients have, where gradually over a period of time it can get worse and you lose more memories, but you can usually retain them from a while back. But then I had antegrade amnesia, which means that I can't hold on to information as I get it now. I forget very easily and it's just gone. I know it affected, well, it still affects my life because people get so frustrated because it's like me talking to my mom with dementia where they're like, you already just said that, or you know that, or we know that, or you told us that, or whatever. So I have been, after that, I sort of put out to pasture. I stayed at home and didn't do anything. I basically cried for about 7 years. I was waiting for the mania to come back and it wasn't coming back, and I didn't know if it was the ECT or what, but like I said, it had been my friend. It had always been sort of my saving grace, was knowing that if I just go manic again, I could fix my life. But it wasn't coming back. I ended up in clinical trials, and that's not even something that I remember much. I remember, somebody telling me that I'd been in clinical trials for 6 years. So I'd see a new resident and they would think that they had the solution to fix me. And everybody sort of wanted a bite of the apple to be the one to turn it around, but all it gave me was all the side effects of the different drugs and stuff, and wasn't on any of the drugs long enough to find out if they truly had any long-term good effects on me. Then I just survived. I just tried to live a daily life. It usually meant I didn't get dressed, I didn't shower, I didn't anything. I was just pretty depressed, pretty suicidal. And so where does that leave me now? What am I doing now? I don't know how many medication changes I've been on. I would imagine I've got a box here full from the last 2 years that haven't worked because I returned them to the dispensary at the hospitals not at the hospital, at the Shoppers, and they dispose of them for me. But I've got this box of them and I'm going to use it in a TikTok video that I'm going to do about psychiatric abuse, just the sheer amount of pills and that. And I ended up getting arrested for working under the table. And I never really gave it a lot of thought when somebody asked me if I wanted to make a little extra cash to try to do some light bookkeeping for them. And so I agreed because I needed the money and they needed the help and whatever else. And I ended up getting turned in by the girlfriend of the guy that I was working for. He had crews going up to Fort McMurray. They were in steel erectors. And she phoned my insurance liability carrier and told them that I was working. So I got arrested at the hair salon and charged with fraud over $5,000, which is a bad charge. Fraud over, because it literally, because there's no certain amount. It's not between 5,000 and 10 or 5,000, whatever. It's just above 5,000, which means I theoretically could have ripped off seniors for millions of dollars and nobody would know by that charge name.
Let me ask you this. Whenever you were manic, obviously that was being aided by the cocaine use and stuff like that, the things that you were putting into your body to sort of help you stay manic. Did you ever, whenever you talk about the mania not coming back, was that period of time where you weren't abusing any kind of drugs, or?
No, I was still using cocaine at that point. Once I was arrested is when I stopped using cocaine because part of my sentence was random drug and alcohol testing. So that was in 2011. was the last time I used. So my 10-year anniversary of being sober was actually June 2nd of this year. I've been to rehab 5 times, and 3 times at Panoka, and once at Henwood, and then once at Landers. But I don't believe that rehab works. I think you've got to work it so hard, because if you had a habit for 20, 30 years, and now the programs have been shortened even from 28 days down to 21, that's not a lot of time to do or even know how to use the tools to try to get better. I ended up working at a friend's store. I really couldn't work anywhere because I had criminal offense with fraud, right? So I wasn't bondable. But I ended up working at a friend's store, and really struggled with that because we have a door that leads downstairs. It looks like part of the wall, so I forgot it was there, so I didn't know where downstairs was. I couldn't remember codes. I couldn't remember how to use the cash register, but eventually there was things that I got okay at and a little more comfortable with. But one day on the way home, my manager just lived 2 blocks away from me, so I would get a ride with her. And she said that she'd spoken with the boss and they had decided that I needed to take some time off because I seemed really confused and just wasn't myself. And I was devastated because I didn't see any changes in myself at all. Like, I didn't remember feeling confused. But they told me to get a med check done, that maybe my meds needed to be reevaluated. And my doctor and I had talked about that before anyways, which was being admitted into a psychiatric ward, being medically detoxed off of the medication that I was on, and then start fresh. Because I was on medication, and then I'd be on medication to deal with the side effects from the first medication, and so on and so on. And some of these were 3 and 4 tiers high. And so I went to Shoppers Drug Mart, which is a drugstore here. I don't know, I guess all across Canada, I imagine. And the pharmacist said to me, the first thing he said was, "How long have you been talking out of the side of your mouth?" And I looked at my daughter, and my daughter said I didn't notice that she had been, but it was quite prevalent. They thought I had a stroke, so they'd sent me to the hospital right away. And it turned out I had Serotonin Syndrome, which is an overproduction of serotonin in your brain, and it can be fatal. So what they had to do is they had to take me off all my medication cold turkey as well. And I cried and I cried. And my daughter was just blown away when she found out they took me off of everything, because I was so sure that I was going to go psychotic, because I didn't understand how I could be on that much antipsychotic medication, be taken off of it, and not go psychotic. And I had nurses praying for me, with me, anybody that would pray for me. And I'm not a religious person, but I was that scared. I was afraid to go to sleep and that I would never wake up and be me again, that I would be lost. And it didn't happen. And then we thought the mania would come back, and it didn't happen. And now we know that the center of my brain, the neurotransmitter, whatever, I'm not producing dopamine, and dopamine is responsible for euphoria, joy, happiness, focus, motivation. It's just been burnt out. They decided to put me on amphetamines because he was trying so hard to get me to get up again, because he knew how important, even though they don't like mania, he knew that it was important that I could be as close to being manic as possible, and he was okay with that. So they put me on Adderall, and it didn't do anything for me. So then I went to Bipentin, which is like a Ritalin, but also an amphetamine, so speed. And I was on the highest legal dose. They have the highest recommended dose that you can sort of go over a bit. And then for some drugs, there's the highest legal dose, like they're legally not allowed to prescribe me anymore than that. So that's what I'm on now. And I should be bouncing off of walls and full of motivation, and they don't know what to do next. They've run out of ideas. There was talk about ketamine, and that's so controversial. because it is on the street of Special K. But they have had some success with it at the Misericordia Hospital here. But my doctor's concerned about the long-term side effects of being on ketamine. And do they really want to go there with me? So right now I'm on about a quarter of the medication I was on before. My grandson is 21 and he's got mental health issues. And I'm sure it was from his contaminated gene pool. And I'm devastated because I know what it can be a life of, right? There's people that find a medication, it works for them, and they just take an antidepressant and they're fine. But going through the cycle and him watching me for as long as he has struggled with this, and then me being 59 and then still looking at medication to treat me, puts him in a really bad place. Like, he feels really sick. And he's got a great psychiatrist that he talks to weekly as well, who does hypnotherapy. And he's got to get some more walls down so that he can do the hypnotherapy to try to prevent my grandson from feeling like his identity is a sick person, because that's how he sort of feels that his identity is, that he's defined by his sickness, just like I feel defined by my mental illness. There's still so much, stigma in place, and even in the hospitals and stuff, it's where you wouldn't expect it. I know one day I was at home and I went to get up and I didn't feel good. Like, something felt like something was terribly wrong, like was going terribly wrong with my body. My vision was going in and out, and I had my friend's father just lived a couple doors down, and he drove me over to one of the Northeast Health Center over here. My blood pressure and stuff was up high, but I wasn't having an anxiety attack. I've had enough of them to know that I wasn't having that. But as soon as I bring my blister pack with me, because it's easier than trying to remember all the drugs that I'm on. So if I go to the hospital or whatever, I always bring a blister pack, which is just pills prepared into daily portions by the pharmacy. And as soon as they see the list of drugs that I'm on, they know that I'm a psychiatric patient. And then everything sort of changes. The doctor would come over to me and ask me what was wrong. And I said, I'm not sure, but I feel like something bad is going to happen. Like, I don't feel well. Like, something's off. And I just said, something bad is going to happen. And he's like, with the world? I'm like, no. Not with the world, with me, right? I'm not in here because I think that there's going to be an Armageddon or anything else. And when I was in the hospital with the Serotonin Syndrome, when I was admitted, and there was a nurse's station, it's just outside of my door, and I heard one of the nurses going off about, because I had a letter from my doctor that I was to give to the hospital to see if they would admit me. And this is before the Serotonin Syndrome, admit me and take me detox me off my medication. And she just lost it. She was like, they spend all the time screwing her up, and then they expect us to fix her. And then when there's not even a signature on this letter, how do we know he's even a real doctor? And she was going on, and she was loud. And I was mortified. I didn't want her anywhere near me. Another nurse came in and just sort of said, "Sir, you had to hear that. She's been removed from your case." But I lost my best friend. It'll be a year, August 31st. She took her life due to mental illness. And she'd been fighting a hard game, and she was chronically suicidal. And because she was out of what they call a frequent flyer in the psychiatric wards, she didn't get the help she needed this time. And that's right through from the crisis line, the distress center, the 108 medical building, which is where her doctor was, and he was gone for a month, but he didn't leave somebody in his absence. Whereas my doctor, if he's gone for a day, there's somebody in his absence in case of emergencies. So she tried to slit her wrists probably maybe like the 27th of August. and she had taken a box of Gravol because she thought it would help with the pain of her slitting her wrist, and it didn't really, and her knife wasn't sharp enough, so she sort of hacked away at her wrist. And I was talking to her on the phone, and I could tell that she didn't sound right. So I phoned the non-emergency police number to do a wellness check on her. And when they went, of course, she had slashed her wrist and was very disoriented and groggy because of taking the box of Gravol. And they didn't take her in. I wanted them to take her in on a 72-hour hold, and then so that, because she needed to be in the hospital because she was extremely suicidal. And they just said no, they didn't think the hospital would take her because she'd gone so many times before. So the next day I went with her to the Northeast Health Center to see if they could stitch up her arm, because it was a pretty wide gash, like it was more chewed up than it was cut. And I said, is there a psychiatrist that she can speak to? Because you would think if, she's obviously just tried to kill herself, that they would be trying to set her up with a psychiatrist, or at least see the consulting psychiatrist that was on duty. And they said, well, as long as you say you've got support or that you won't do it again, you're free to leave. So they just let her go, and her doctor was coming back that following Thursday, and I should have stayed with her for those 4 days, and I didn't. And because of my mental illness and me wanting to be alone, it's hard for me to stay. Sometimes it's hard for me to be a really good support network, depending on how I'm feeling. Like to talk her down from suicide. But her family didn't think that she had a problem. They thought if she went to church, she would be over that. Oh, and the schizophrenia, then I got re-diagnosed, as I said, with that type 1 bipolar, and then was reevaluated with schizoaffective disorder. And I used to have horrendous hallucinations of demons. And I would stay at my daughter's in her basement, and it's developed, whatever, but I would feel like somebody was sitting on the couch beside me. I could feel like somebody sat down because of the movement on the couch. And then I'd smell this foul odor, and I didn't want to look over because I knew it was a demon that was there. And it was just their breath that smelled like that, and they would just hiss at me and just say, he's coming for you, he's coming for you. And I was so scared. My daughter heard me crying all the way upstairs one night, and she's going, run, Mom, run. They never come upstairs to get you. They never come up here. And they never did. They only ever affected me here at night. So for a good year and a half, I slept sitting up with all the lights on, the TV on, whatever else. As soon as it started to get dark outside, I started to cry because I knew that meant they'd be coming back. And I'm not a religious person, but I sure prayed an awful lot and begged a lot for them to go away. That's the one thing, since the Serotonin Syndrome, they haven't been back. So that is a huge deal that they're gone. So that was obviously medication induced. And the schizophrenia part that I have is drug-induced schizophrenia, but it's from the psychiatric drugs that I've developed it. So, and not going off the pills doesn't make it go away. It's sort of once you have it, you have it. And, I know the dosages of the pills I was on. My sister-in-law couldn't sleep one night, so I gave her 50 milligrams of Seroquel because I was taking 1,600 milligrams. And the recommended highest dose is 800, but I was up to 1,600. And she slept for 2 days. And at one point I was on the 1,600 milligrams of the Seroquel and 600 of Trazodone, which also is sleep-inducing, and then 3 7.5 milligrams of Imodane or Zopiclone, which is one of the Canada's sleeping pills, and still couldn't sleep. So that was my mania trying to fight the pills. So I been writing a book, put it off for years and started again in 2016 and then can't concentrate, or I have a shoebox tape recorder that I ordered, and I just keep it beside my bed, and every time I have a memory or a flashback or something, I record it on there and then type it up into what hopefully the book's completed. It's just a matter of doing a book proposal and building a platform and stuff.
Well, I appreciate you telling your story.
Thanks, Derek.
Well, I don't think it, I thought it, that's different. I said what I said and I meant it, or lamented. Words given weight without thought, and I'm cursing the way that I talk and the way that I ought to be able to pause and to say that the fault can be placed on my arm, to this playful assault, to disgrace in this arm. Pray for the day they could wait for the calm. You can't control the storm, only weather it, whether it's 5 weeks and 5 days of rain sideways, or scorched earth, search for death, or water left with all the thorns, with the petals gone, settle on the breath of autumn. If the ground fits, wear it, then